The Avenger, a Byomesh Bakshi story by Sharadindu Bandyopadhyay. Byomesh and I went to Biren Babu's daughter's wedding last February. The town was some distance away from Calcutta. It was ancient and dirty. From Calcutta, it took us about 3 hours by train. We knew Biren Babu intimately for a long time. He was a police officer in Calcutta. An amiable and helpful man, he had retired 2 years back and had settled here in his ancestral home. He had begged us to attend his daughter's wedding. Byomesh was free, so we decided to accept the invitation. As we reached the house, we heard the sound of shehnai and saw people busily running here and there. Biren Babu welcomed us warmly and took us to a decorated room, which the bridegroom and his entourage would occupy in the evening. At present, it was empty. We made ourselves comfortable there and were served tea and snacks. Byomesh told Biren Babu, "You must be very busy. Feel free to go and attend to your duties. We are very comfortable." Biren Babu looked relieved. Suddenly we heard a deep voice outside. "Biren, I have come to see what arrangements you have made for your daughter's wedding." Biren Babu quickly went out and ushered an elderly man into the room. "It is good, sir, that you have come. These are my 2 friends from Calcutta. He is the well-known Byomesh Bakshi, the truth seeker, and this is his famous writer friend, Ajit Banerjee." "Yes, indeed. I have heard of them." The old gentleman gave us a sharp glance. Biren Babu said, "He is Nilmani Majumdar, also a well-known police officer. He has settled here after retirement." He was a tall and fair man, well above 60, but erect as a ramrod. Although he had a walking stick in his hand, he did not seem to need it. His voice was heavy, and his appearance commanded respect. Byomesh asked him to sit down. Biren Babu sought our permission to leave. Byomesh asked, "Is your ancestral home here too?" Nilmani Babu said, "No, my home was in East Bengal, but everything was lost during partition. After retirement, I have settled here." Byomesh asked, "Do you have relatives here?" Nilmani Babu said, "I have no relatives. I'm a bachelor. I was so involved with the police job that I did not think of anything else. Then when I retired, I remained here. I have an affection for this town. When I started my career as a sub-inspector, I was posted here. Before I retired, I was posted here too." Byomesh smiled. "You love this town. How long have you been retired?" 7 years. As in most cases, Byomesh was the subject of Nilmani Babu's curiosity, but his glance was different from the admiring glances of other people. He seemed to be weighing and gauging Byomesh and his intelligence. When he spoke, he sounded skeptical and at the same time curious. "Byomesh Babu, I have read about you and your work. I have noticed that you have solved all the cases which have come to you. So I'm curious to know, have you never been unsuccessful? Have you never made a mistake?" Byomesh smiled humbly. "I can't say I have never made mistakes or I have never failed. In fact, I have even failed to catch criminals in a few cases. But I've always got to the bottom of the mystery and found out the truth. Sir, remember that I'm a truth seeker. But of course, you must have had many more cases than I have ever had." Nilmani Babu seemed quite satisfied with Byomesh's answer. He now sounded a bit more friendly. "Look, there are a lot of problems in our job. Most of the cases are small ones dealing with petty criminals. It is rarely that we get cases involving big criminals. Again, my experience says that it is easier to catch the bigger offenders than the small ones." Byomesh said, Even the doctors say that it is easier to cure serious diseases rather than common cold. So, have you been successful in catching all your important offenders? Nilmani Babu was quiet for some time. Then he looked at Byomkesh sharply. I have been successful in most cases, except the last case of my life. It happened in this town itself, but I could not solve it. Byomkesh said, You know who the culprit was, but could not prove it. Is that so? Nilmani Babu said hesitantly, I was sure that one particular person was involved, but I could not break his alibi. Then another incident occurred, which turned all my investigations topsy-turvy. I never could find out who the real culprit was. Byomkesh was quiet. Nilmani Majumdar looked at Byomkesh sharply and said, Do you want to hear the story? Byomkesh said eagerly, Of course, it seems a very interesting one. You will judge whether it was interesting. I will tell you all I know about the case. Maybe you will succeed where I had failed. There was a note of challenge in his voice. Byomkesh smiled and said, I don't think it's possible for me to solve something which an experienced person like you could not. I'm only interested in hearing the story. Nilmani Majumdar began his story in his deep, resonant voice. Just before retirement, Nilmani Babu was posted in this town as the head of the police station here. He had 3 good qualities: intelligence, diligence, and honesty. He never took bribes. This town, though small, was known for its criminal activities. Nilmani knew this town well, so after being transferred here, he took up the reins of police administration with iron hands. A year and a half passed. There was some peace in this town, thanks to Nilmani. He had a habit of going on rounds twice a week at midnight on his cycle. No one knew when he would go on these rounds. One part of the town was especially prone to crimes. This part was a special favorite with Nilmani. He used to move around the small lanes and by-lanes and kept a watch on whether the policemen on duty were alert. There were no lights in his cycle, but he always had his revolver and a torch with him. On this particular night, he was on his usual rounds. It was a dark night and no one was around. There was an area in between the place which housed well-to-do, decent society and the dark lanes of the criminal world. This area was a twilight area, surrounded by mango groves. It consisted of a few dilapidated houses. The people of this area, too, belonged neither here nor there. While moving in this area, Nilmani noticed that about 50 yards away, a few men were carrying something like a bamboo cot on their shoulders. Their behavior was suspicious. He quickly rode up to them and accosted them by flashing his torch on their faces. "Stop!" There were 4 people. They dropped the cot and vanished in the dark. But Nilmani clearly saw the face of one of them. He was the owner of one of those houses, Sureshwar Ghosh. The men had vanished in all directions. It was useless following them. Nilmani went up to the cot and found that on it was a body of a young, healthy woman. There was no sign of wounds, but she was dead. Nilmani blew his whistle. Slowly policemen and people began collecting there. The neighbors identified the body immediately. It was Hashi, the wife of Sureshwar. No one else lived in the house besides Sureshwar and his wife. Nilmani took a few neighbors with him and entered the house. It was quite a large house with about 6 rooms, but most of the rooms were not used. Only 2 rooms were used. One was the bedroom. It was a large room with 2 beds. One looked slept in, the other was not. But there was no one in the house. There was no one in the garden either. There were mango and jackfruit trees in the garden. Nilmani Babu asked the neighbors, "Was the girl ill?" One of them said, "No. This afternoon I saw her talking to Binod Babu near the gate." "Who is Binod Babu?" "Binod Sharkar. He's a jeweller and has a shop in the market." Some more constables had arrived with a sub-inspector. He sent the body with them for post-mortem. The neighbours were still standing around, gossiping and whispering to each other. Nilmani asked them, "What is the name of the girl's husband?" "Sureshwar Ghosh." "Where is he?" No one opened his mouth. Then one person said unwillingly, "Sureshwar goes out of the house after dinner and does not come back till 1:30 or 2 in the night." "Where does he go?" "We have heard that he goes to Kali Kinkar Das's shop to gamble." "Where is Kali Kinkar Das's shop?" The neighbours gave him the address. Nilmani left a constable waiting in the house and took the sub-inspector with him to look for the shop. He told the neighbours, "I will come and take your testimony tomorrow morning." Kali Kinkar's shop was half a mile from Sureshwar's house, just near the edge of the marketplace. It was an iron and steel shop. This area of the market was known as Lohapatti. Nilmani reached the shop, walking through the deserted marketplace. Iron rods were heaped in front of the shop, but the door of the shop was closed. Nilmani Babu looked around and then peeped through a hole in the window. On a carpet on the floor sat 4 men, playing cards with great concentration. In the middle was some money. They were obviously gambling for a stake. They were playing flush. Nilmani beckoned the sub-inspector. The latter stood at the door, while Nilmani knocked at the window. All 4 turned anxious eyes on the window. One of them grabbed all the money in the center and put it into his pocket. Nilmani called out in a stern voice, "Open the door." The 4 looked at each other, and one of them raised his voice and asked, "Who is it?" Nilmani said, "Police. Open the door." Again they looked at each other. Then probably Kali Kinkar Das got up. Now Nilmani moved away from the window and stood in front of the door. The door opened. The thin skeletal man looked at the 2 police officials and took a step backward. "What? What do you want?" Nilmani said, "Are you Kali Kinkar Das?" "Yes." "What do you want?" "Who else are there with you?" Kali Kinkar gulped and said, 3 of my friends." Nilmani entered the shop with the sub-inspector. Next to this room was the door to the office of the shop. When he entered the office, Nilmani found that the 3 men were still playing cards. He watched each of them. Their ages ranged from 35 to 40. Their appearances were undistinguished. Only the one who was serving the cards looked quite muscular. He looked like their leader. Nilmani Babu asked, "Who is Sureshwar Ghosh?" The stout man looked up, put away the pack of cards, and stood up. "I am Sureshwar Ghosh. What do you want?" His voice was calm, and he was totally composed. Nilmani looked from one to the other. "You ought that you would take the dead body quietly in the dead of the night and burn it in the ghat. Once it was burnt, there would be no proof of the crime." All 4 looked genuinely surprised. Sureshwar said, "Dead body? Whose dead body?" Nilmani Babu said, "Don't pretend. I saw you in the light of the torch. You are one of the 4 who was carrying the dead body." Sureshwar said, "Which day are you talking about?" "I'm talking about today, tonight at 12. "You are talking rubbish. We started playing cards at 8:30 p.m. in the evening, and none of us went out even for a minute." "So you were playing cards? Gambling?" The 3 looked down guiltily. Sureshwar was bold. "Yes, we were gambling. The 4 of us sometimes played together." Neilmani found that it was impossible to get anything out of them there. They had to be taken to the police station. He said, "Right now I'm arresting you on charges of gambling. Come with us to the police station." There was an argument, but at last all four agreed to go to the police station. Neilmani Babu said, "If you can get a bail, I will let you go tonight." On the way to the police station, Sureshwar asked, "What were you saying about a dead body?" "Whose dead body?" Neilmani said, "Your wife's." Sureshwar stood stock still on the road. "My wife's? What are you saying?" "I am saying that your wife has been murdered." No, I don't believe all this. Hashi? No, I'm going home." "It's no use going home. The dead body has been sent for post-mortem." In the police station, Neilmani Babu began questioning the four separately. First he called Sureshwar. When he sat down, Neilmani asked, "What work do you do?" Sureshwar said, "I look after different kinds of business. I am a moneyed man, not a petty businessman." "Is the house yours?" "Yes." "When did you buy it?" "About 5 or 6 years back." "When did you get married?" 7 years back." "Where is your in-laws' house?" "In this town." "What is the name of your father-in-law?" "Dinamani Haldar." "Where is he now?" "I'm not sure. Probably in jail." "Jail?" "Yes. Jail is where he spends most of his time." "Do you have a good relationship with your father-in-law?" "I can't stand him." Neilmani Babu thought for some time and asked, "Did you have a good relationship with your wife?" Sureshwar hesitated for a while and said, "As good a relationship as is possible after 7 years of marriage." "Do you have no children?" "No, my wife was infertile." Neilmani Babu lifted his finger at him and said, "At 12 tonight I saw you and your 3 friends carrying the dead body of your wife. I flashed my torch on your face." Sureshwar said in an unperturbed voice, "You are wrong. I was playing cards in Kalikinkar's shop with 3 of my friends at 12. "What was the character of your wife like?" "Who can say about the characters of women? But the neighbors spoke ill of her." "What did they say?" "I returned late at night. It seems a person used to come and meet Hashi for the last few months." "Did you ask your wife about this?" "Yes. She said that it was all lies." "Anything else?" "What else? Once I opened her cupboard and found a few pieces of jewelry which I had not given her." "Did you ask where those pieces came from?" "What's the use? If a woman wants to go astray, no one can save her." "But one can murder her." "I have not killed Hashi." Neilmani tried hard but could not make Sureshwar confess anything. In fact, it seemed that he was outspoken and truthful. Next he called Kalikinkar. The latter had a hard, strong heart in a thin, infirm body. Neilmani could not make him confess either. According to him, the 4 friends had started playing cards at 8:30 in the evening and were there till the police entered the shop. But he was also quite frank. Sureshwar was his childhood friend. Sureshwar was not very rich earlier, but had made money through contracts during the war. He had married Hashi when he was poor. Hashi's father was a thief and a fool. He always got caught when stealing and spent a lot of his time in the prison. Hashi's mother had a bad name. Living in the slum had corrupted her character. When Hashi's father was in the jail, her mother entertained customers. So when Sureshwar wanted to marry Hashi, all his friends had advised him against it, but he did not listen to anyone. Then Sureshwar became quite rich, bought a house, but by that time the relationship between him and his wife had soured. He never stayed home for long, but spent most of his time outside. But it is not true that he had murdered his wife. He was not that kind of a person. He came from a good family and had struggled a lot in his early life. But he had a heart of gold. Nilmani asked at this point, "Where is Sureshwar's father-in-law, Dinamani Haldar, now?" Kalikinkar said, "About 2 years back, Dinamani Haldar came in search of his daughter. His wife was dead. He lived with his daughter and son-in-law for 2 or 3 days. One day he had a quarrel with Sureshwar. Then Dinamani left. I haven't seen him again. He was old. Besides, jail life had weakened him. He must be dead." Next was Debu Mondul's turn. Debu did business in coal and firewood. He was a wealthy man. Sureshwar was a very good childhood friend. It was a total lie that Sureshwar had murdered his wife and was taking her body away to be burnt. They were playing cards. He refused to comment on the character of Hashi, but the girl did not come from a good family. Nilmani said, "Do you have a shop of firewood in the burning hut?" Debu was a little shaken. "Yes, I have 2 go-downs in the town and 1 in the burning hut." Nilmani Babu looked at him with a frown and said, "Will you tell me the truth now?" "I am telling the truth." The 4th person was Bilash Datta, a building contractor, very sweet-tongued, polite, and witty. But he, too, had no doubt that the 4 of them were playing cards from 8:30 in the evening till the police came in. Nilmani found out that Bilash Datta belonged to that category of human beings who talked a lot of rubbish but never the truth. Disappointed, he asked, "You are a contractor. You must be having a lot of bamboos." Bilash said, "Bamboos, yes, lots of bamboos. I need them for scaffoldings for buildings." "You need them also to make cots for the dead." It was early morning by the time Nilmani Babu finished questioning the 4, but he could not keep them in custody because their lawyer bailed them out the very next day. Nilmani was sure that Sureshwar had killed his wife, but was unable to prove it. He was also sure that the other 3 were involved, but there was no proof. There was no witness to what he had seen. Their lawyer would prove him wrong in the court, so he could not bring the charge of murder, although he did bring the charge of gambling against them. But he continued investigating the case. He questioned Sureshwar's neighbors, 2 of his assistants. Then he went to his house at about 1 in the afternoon. There was a constable at the gate who said that Sureshwar had come back at 11 and was in the house. Nilmani Babu entered the house and found him sleeping in one bed. He opened bloodshot eyes at the sound of footsteps and mumbled sleepily, "Now what do you want?" Nilmani Babu said, "We want to search the house." "Do whatever you want. Let me sleep." He was probably making up for a sleepless night. But did he not feel anything for his wife? Even if he did not murder her, this seemed a strange reaction to Nilmani Babu, who was angry at his callous behavior. He did not allow Sureshwar to sleep. "I want to see your wife's ornaments." Sureshwar got up irritatedly, opened the cupboard, and took out a box of ornaments. Nilmani said, "Which ones out of there did you not give her?" Sureshwar picked up a ring, a pair of earrings, and a hair clip from the box. Nilmani took them and put them in his pocket. "I'm taking these. I will return them later." Then the police party searched the whole house and garden. but they found nothing incriminating. At about 3 in the afternoon, Nilmani Babu went from Sureshwar's house to the shop of Binod Sharkar, the jeweller. It was a large shop. On one side the workers sat making ornaments. Binod was sitting in a well-decorated room. He was about 50, but had fancy tastes. He wore a silk kurta, a fine quality dhoti, and had a well-trimmed moustache. He tried to hide his bald pate by covering it with hair from all the sides. He was short and a bit plump. When he saw policemen at his doorstep, he was slightly nervous. "Has anything happened in my shop?" "What has happened?" Nilmani sat on a chair opposite him and said, "No, I have come to get some information from you." "Yes?" "Sureshwar's wife is dead. Do you know anything about it?" Binod jumped up from his chair. "Hashi is dead? But I saw her last evening." "She died last night." "But she was all right in the evening. How did she die?" "I think she was murdered." "Murdered?" Binod Babu sat on his chair and stared vacantly. Then he slapped the table and said, "Sureshwar has killed her, I'm sure." "But Sureshwar has a perfect alibi." "I don't care about alibi. He and his 3 friends killed the girl. They're all wicked. They can do anything." Nilmani Babu said, "Did you know Hashi for a long time?" "I knew her from when she was 3 or 4 years old." Then he gave Nilmani a furtive, shy look and said in a low voice, "You are a policeman. I will not conceal anything from you. When I was young, I had a relationship with Hashi's mother. That was about 20 years ago. Hashi's father was a scoundrel, thief, smuggler, drunkard. He could not feed his wife and daughter, so because of poverty, she had to... Let that be. A few years ago, Hashi's mother died. Before her death, she told me to look after her daughter, as Sureshwar was a wicked person. I could not avoid her last request, so I used to go to the house to meet Hashi. Hashi's mother was not the model of fidelity, that's true, but she was a good human being. She had a very sweet nature." No one spoke for some time. Then Nilmani Babu said, "Then you suspect that Sureshwar has murdered Hashi?" Binod Babu surfaced from a sea of memories and said absent-mindedly, "What? Yes, I think so." "But what was his motive?" "Look, when Sureshwar married Hashi, he was a poor man. Then during the war, he became very rich. Now he wanted to be associated with respectable people. But if Hashi was alive, it was impossible. Everyone knew what kind of a family Hashi came from. So he killed her. He will marry again and become a gentleman." "What was Hashi's character and conduct like?" "She was a simple girl without any hypocrisy or cunning. She may have been a little fond of male company. She would stand at the gate in the evenings and call people and talk to them. One can't blame her. The women in the neighborhood avoided her for her antecedents. So she too needed company. I can say with conviction that she had no other serious fault of character." Nilmani Babu then took out Hashi's ornaments from his pocket. "Can you recognize these?" "Are these Hashi's ornaments? But I have never seen her wearing them." "You never presented her with ornaments?" "No. I gave her saris during the pujas and Holi. I never gave her any ornaments." Nilmani Babu said, "Have these been made in your shop?" Binod Babu examined them. "No, these have not been made in my shop. Just a minute." He called a worker. "Please send in Ramdayal to me." An old man came to him. Binod Babu showed him the ornaments. "Did we make these, Ramdayal?" He looked at them carefully and said, "No, sir. These have been made in Calcutta." "All right, you can go." Neelmani got up to leave. "I will come again if I need you." "Most certainly." That evening, Neelmani Babu met the civil surgeon in his bungalow. His office was on one side of the house. Major Berman was winding up his work when Neelmani arrived. "I came to find out about the report." Major Berman said, "Sit down. I have done the post-mortem. You will get the report tomorrow." "What did you find out? When did she die?" "She died about 10 at night." "How did she die?" "There was no sign of any assault on her body." "Was it poison then?" Major Berman said slowly, "No, not even poison. She was killed in a novel way. Is there any military man among your suspects?" Neelmani said, "No, but the girl's husband was a military contractor during the war and had worked closely with the American soldiers posted here." "Why? What's the matter?" Major Berman said, "One can't see any sign of the blow anywhere in the body, but the thyroid cartilage in her throat was completely broken." Neelmani said, "That means she was throttled to death." "No. If she was throttled, there would have been marks of fingers on her throat." "Then?" Major Berman said, "In the last war, the soldiers were taught to fight without arms." "How's that?" "Suppose that a battle was going on in the jungle. You are unarmed and cannot defend yourself, and you have been captured by an armed enemy soldier. You are unable to escape. If you try, he will shoot you. So what do? Cunningly, you move to the right of your enemy, and suddenly you turn around and hit him hard on the throat with the side of your right palm. The thyroid cartilage breaks and the person dies at once. Something like your modern karate chop." "Instant death?" "Yes." Neelmani Babu said, "You are sure that the girl was killed like that?" "I'm certain." "All right. Tomorrow I will send a person for the report." Neelmani came back to the police station without a doubt in his mind that Sureshwar had killed Hashi. There was only one mystery. Who used to come and meet Hashi at night? Did he give her the ornaments? What relation did Hashi have with this man? But if he wasn't Hashi's friend, why should he kill Hashi? The next day, Neelmani Babu went with a sub-inspector and a constable to Sureshwar's house. He was determined to get a confession out of him. Sureshwar's house was wide open and there was no one in the house. He called out a few times and went in. He stopped short when he reached the bedroom. Sureshwar was lying dead on the floor. The evening before 2, Sureshwar had gone to his friend's house to play cards and had come back at about midnight. Then no one knows what had happened. Major Berman gave the post-mortem report of Sureshwar's body. He too had died because his thyroid cartilage had been broken with a blow. Hashi and Sureshwar were killed in the same way. After finishing the story, Neelmani Babu stopped for some time, waiting for Byomesh to ask some questions. "I have told you everything I know. At first I thought that Sureshwar had killed Hashi, but later Sureshwar was killed in the same way. So the man who murdered Hashi must have killed Sureshwar also. Can you guess anything?" Byomesh was listening attentively. "I want to ask a few more questions. I will give you answers if I know the answers myself. Byomesh said, "Who is Sureshwar's heir?" "A cousin of Sureshwar. He had not made a will. She is a widow and penniless. She has got all his property." "Where were his 3 friends on the night of his death?" "After Sureshwar left for home, they played cards nearly for the whole night in Kalikinkar's shop. I had employed informers to bring me all the news. They did not kill Sureshwar." "What about Binod Sarkar?" "No, I did not suspect him." "What was his motive?" "He was genuinely fond of Hashi." "Where was Dinamani Halder at that time?" "He was suffering from a terrible attack of dysentery in a village 50 miles away. He could not move. Besides, how would he know the trick of killing in that special way?" "All right. Do you think that Hashi had a loose character?" "No. I think she was a good girl." Byomesh thought for some time. "But she was born of another with a loose character. What did you say her name was?" "Amala." Byomesh looked up and stared at Neelmani Babu. He too looked at Byomesh and his body stiffened. Then Byomesh relaxed in his chair. Neelmani said, "Do you want to know anything else?" Byomesh said, "There is nothing else to know." Neelmani said sarcastically, "Have you understood anything?" Byomesh said gravely, "Neelmani Babu, I have understood everything." Neelmani was still for some time. "You have understood who killed Hashi?" "Yes, of course. Hashi was murdered by Sureshwar." "Really? Then who killed Sureshwar?" "Sureshwar was killed by Hashi's father." "Hashi's father? But I told you just now that Dinamani Halder was ill 50 miles away." "I'm not talking about Dinamani Halder. I'm talking about Hashi's real father, her biological father." Neelmani was very quiet. I found that he had become very pale. When he spoke again, his voice was a mere whisper. "Biological father? Who do you mean?" Byomesh shook his head sadly. "You know who I am talking about, Neelmani Babu. You should not have told me this story." I don't know how Neelmani Babu would have reacted to this, but at that moment Biren Babu came into the room. "Byomesh Babu, lunch is ready. Please have your bath. Neelmani Da, why don't you stay back for lunch too?" Neelmani Babu stood up hastily. No, I'm going. I'm already late." He went out of the room quickly, without once looking back at us. After lunch, we were relaxing again in the same room. I asked, "How did you guess about Neelmani Babu?" Byomesh said, "While listening to his story, I felt that he was favorably inclined towards Hashi, although there was no reason to be so. According to him, he did not know Hashi when she was alive. Whatever we got to know about Hashi from his story showed her to be a flirt. Her husband was suspicious about her. An unknown man used to visit her at night. Then why should Neelmani be well disposed towards her? Hashi's mother was not an example of true fidelity either. Amala's husband, Dinamani Halder, was more often inside the prison than not. So Hashi's father may not have been Dinamani. Binod Sarkar was also not Hashi's father, because he met her mother, Amala, when Hashi was about 3 or 4 years old. Then who was the unknown man? Neelmani told us, even before he began his story, that his first posting was in this town. Dinamani was a professional thief. Neelmani Babu may have gone to Amala and Dinamani's house, either to search it or to arrest him. It was then that the young policeman had a relationship with the attractive wife of the thief. After a year or two, Neelmani was transferred from this place. By this time, he had got to know that he had a daughter from Amala, and she was called Hashi. He used to keep in touch with Hashi and her mother, even when he was posted to other places. He had not married, so the only blood relation he had was Hashi. Towards the end of his career, he was again posted in this town. Hashi's mother was dead by that time, and she was married. Neelmani Babu had a habit of moving around at night on his cycle to keep vigil. It was during these times that he met Hashi and even presented her with a few pieces of jewelry. She may or may not have known about her relationship with him, but she may have guessed. But her neighbors jumped to the wrong conclusions and thought that she used to meet her paramour at night, in the absence of a husband. On the day that Hashi was murdered, Neelmani was probably going to meet her. Then we know what happened from the story he related to us. I think Sureshwar killed his wife and asked his friends to help him that night to burn the body. The friends decided that they would leave no trace of the body, and the next day they would tell everyone that Hashi had eloped. They were indeed fast friends. Neelmani brought all the four to the police station, but failed to find a chink in their alibi. When he found that he was unable to hang the murderer of his daughter, he decided to kill Sureshwar himself to avenge the death of Hashi. He did not wait. Within 24 hours of Hashi's death, he killed Sureshwar in the same way as Sureshwar had killed Hashi. He had learned the art of killing without arms, from what he had heard from the doctor. But just think, Ajit, whatever I have told you is based entirely on supposition. I could only be sure if I had any way of proving that Neelmani was Hashi's father. So I set a trap for him. Suddenly I asked, what was the name of Hashi's mother? He answered without thinking, Amala. How did he know her name? No one had mentioned her name even once in connection with this case. She had died 10 years ago. I had no doubts left now. As soon as he mentioned Amala's name to me, he realized that he had walked into my trap. I too realized, from the expression on his face, that my suspicion was correct. Neelmani Babu's unknown culprit was Neelmani Babu himself.